I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and I'm really happy that we're going to have an event where we focus on our issues, we focus on our challenges, and we focus on our strengths and contributions as African ancestry people. And I'm happy to have an entire panel of African ancestry people. This is not common, this is not usual. So this makes it very special. And I think I've mentioned before that this kind of feels like a family reunion, even though I haven't met everyone who's attending before. But I would want for us to make this sort of like a celebration. So we're going to have a good time, and we're going to speak about things that matter to all of us.
One is that I am a South African who has traveled to various different parts of the world, and I've spent time in many parts of the world, but I've never been forced to live outside of my home. And of course, I recognize this as a privilege that many do not have. So I come to this conversation aware of the privilege I have of being able to live and make a living in my home country. The second is that South Africa, like many countries, ironically or interestingly, across the continent and globally, has xenophobia and has Afrophobia specifically, with the fact that, you know, these conversations, as difficult as they are very important, because we cannot talk about what it means to be South African without talking about what it means to not be South African. And so to talk about being South African is to talk about what it is to not be South African, and to talk about belonging. The media mostly write stories about necklacing when it happens to people who are not South African. And this creates the impression that South Africans are burning people who are not South African only, whereas there is violence in South Africa, and there is mob violence, and this mob violence affects people from South Africa and people from outside of South Africa.
So there are programs in place that exist. I think most locals are not aware. I also became aware by chance because I was working with displaced people. I did mention in my brief a little, but it is a more involved program that helps everybody coming from any other African state into the country, so that they can find schooling, they can find social services and all the other things, but within the confines of the law of the land. So this is probably one thing that causes strife and division between our people and our brothers and sisters, because there are ways in which people can maneuver themselves without knowing the right way. So I think the more we speak about these things and we create awareness, then everybody else will be able to know what to do in case they are confronted with a situation that pushes them to come south. There are platforms. I know that most of them are spearheaded by white people. So there is a lacking in terms of the Afrocentric approach to welcoming our brothers and sisters, but it's something that can be developed and worked on. So I was speaking to a friend of mine, it's about 3 days ago, to say to him that there seems to be a lack of awareness that we are constantly at war. And most people associate war with violence, but we see war in the spaces that we work in, the microaggressions at work. You being made to feel inadequate in spaces that you work. Having African graduates that cannot get employed. These things in itself, they happen to be war. And
I believe that we do not need white people to do for us what we can do for ourselves. We need to look inwards to look outwards. One of the challenges facing all of us basically here right now is because we've been so Europeanized in terms of our education, our mindset and our thinking. We look to European solutions for African to fix Africa, which would never work for us. Like Asanda said, we know the history, apartheid, colonialism, they've come in. They've basically taken over the whole system. Basically, we become second class on our own continent. Consequently,
I'm African, I'm a Yoruba man, and then I'm Nigerian. That's kind of how I see myself. Just because, from the conversations that we've been having, Nigeria is, in my opinion, essentially a colonial construct. I respect the fact that we have to live within the countries that we live in now, but I would even say Nigeria in itself is a name that was not given by ourselves, right? So he don't even bear a name that we gave ourselves. But having said that, I mean, I started my career as a young man in Nigeria. And, you know, I had a good time working there, you know, feeling very valuable in terms of the work I do and to the communities that we provide work to. And, you know, I got the opportunity through my work to move to the US after a point in time on what was called the Global Management Program. And I mean, once I moved to the US, after a while, or very quickly, I mean, I really started to notice a lot of things that I, of course, in Nigeria would not have observed or seen. I mean, one of the first people that I started to talk to was an African American who was working in the IT department, very nice guy. And I really started to learn a lot. I mean, just going to Asanda's point, a lot about the conditions that the people who live on the land itself experience. I mean, I would say that I was privileged in the sense that I got an opportunity through my work, and I was working there and doing a job that, I mean, depending on how you put it, it was definitely above, much above in terms of like minimum wage or any of that, so to speak, right? And so seeing sort of communities within the New York area, and I always say this, that when you see an environment where there's so much wealth, but also so much poverty in the same place, and you see like who the people that are actually experiencing so much of the poverty, do you know what I mean? And who's experiencing so much of the wealth? I mean, it starts to really make you ask questions if you are really like observing the world around you. And I'm saying this intentionally just to kind of like get to the point that I think sometimes there's a challenge with people not understanding this. And I say this with some people I've talked to who come from the African continent, for example, because I think all of these things kind of like cutting sort of together or are tied together, who do not sometimes understand the conditions of the place they go to, and you know, come in with the opportunities and sometimes take on that narrative or that stereotype about the people that live there who are also like them, right, in some sense. And so that's a very sort of dangerous narrative in the sense. And so I try to apply a lot of empathy when I...
What occurred to me is that this is happening the same time that the BRICS conference is happening in Kazan, Russia. So as we talk about doing business, and as Olu was talking about doing, you know, individual, you have to serve your community. Those are the two of the keyest components. Because even if we're talking about money, you know, we have to, there's one major thing that we have to recognize. Capitalism, individualism is built on the back of Africans. So we cannot succeed unless we are in the collective and acting in a Pan-African way. And so as we do business with each other, we think about money. What is money? What's behind the little pieces of paper? You know, we're doing business, we're selling, we're buying. What's behind the little pieces of paper? Our resources, that's what's behind the little pieces of paper. And so to the other Oli's point, we need to, you know, decolonize that mind and decolonize that thinking. So it's not about us kumbaya and loving each other, but it's us recognizing that the resources and whatever value there is in the global economy, in doing business, is in us and on our lands.
My first time landing on the continent, I didn't know that I would fall in love with particularly Kenya, but the entire continent. And this catapulted me through our program. And what I've learned and what we teach and what we offer is business development, specifically in Kenya, right? Because you have to start in one place. You can't go all over the place and try to do this. But specifically my area of interest and expertise in regards to helping the diaspora outside of the of African diaspora is education. But more important, what we figured out through this whole process, me myself being African American and also still coming to the continent with American mindset, I had to learn as I'm walking through the process, hey, yo, you're more American than you think you are. Miss Ma'am. And so we need to dial back a bit and incorporate our local cousins and a part of this process. This ain't just about you being African American and coming to these people country and acting like they ain't got nothing to do with it. No. And that's why I renamed my company Traverse Culture, because the nucleus is in the culture, right? The nucleus is in the culture.
What does self-advocacy mean for me? That was a question I wanted to answer today. And for me, self-advocacy, and I will echo what Francisca shared with us, is using your voice to advocate for change. So from a personal perspective, about 2 years ago, I had a very humiliating and painful experience with the immigration office in our city. I believe everyone in this call and everyone on this panel has had their fair share of experiences with immigration or these foreign embassies we are forced to go to. And it was basically very frustrating and challenging to deal with this office. I had had several encounters with them. And the one question I asked myself was, through no fault of my own, but where had this system failed me? And by this system failing me means they also put me at risk. So after this incident, I ended up promising myself that this would be the last time they would ever do something like this, and not just for me, but for everyone else. So what did I do? I started a petition to improve the services of the immigration office in our city. It was a very long and arduous process, especially getting signatures. And I remember the one thing that really got to me was getting signatures from our community, people who are afraid to sign. And I quickly realized that this wasn't an issue for also many people, because you could read from the comments where people would tell you something like, you should be grateful there's an immigration office. And I'm like, okay. So in the end, the petition itself wasn't successful. But there are three significant things that happened that brought about the change that we needed. One was, because I was very loud about the petition, the anti-discrimination agency in the city I lived in signed the petition. The vocational training center signed the petition. And the third thing was, even the employees that work for the government agencies signed that petition. So what this did was, it drew media attention to the petition. And as we all know, especially if you live in the diaspora, image is a very important thing out here. Someone somewhere in a higher office was summoned to the regional constitutional office to explain why they had let this situation escalate to the point of a petition.
So I am Francisca. I am a grandmother of 2 biological and 5 bonus grandchildren. I am a mother to 3 kids, clinical psychologist, telecoms engineer, and pilot. I raised them by myself. I come here to speak about self-advocacy. I was born girl number 3 in a succession of girls, was to use our culture in practicing our freedom. And the mental aspect, this is where I come in. I didn't talk about my business. I work for the government full-time, but I am a transformational coach and mental fitness trainer. The one thing that would help us as Africans is to heal from the trauma. Intentionally create spaces where we heal from our trauma, because everyone has it one way or the other. But how do we move forward without being stuck in our victim mindset? Because it's still happening now. But how do we move forward? I think people talked about it. How do we organize ourselves now so that we are not stuck in the victimhood, but we come together and move forward? So my business helps to get professionals, kids and their parents mentally fit so that they're able to tackle life's challenges with a positive mindset. Not pushed by our anger, our saboteurs, but pulled by our sage. We have wisdom. And so that's what I'm interested in. And you can understand why I would be focusing on mental fitness, because of my history. I need to heal myself. And I'm here, open to share my gift with Africans. If you want it, try me. I'll serve you.